Well, hello, I am Charles Miller. This is the Ministry Road Chat, Voice of Reason, and I like to add, God included. Whatever I talk about, God is included. Some of our last episodes is, if you want to go and look at those or listen to those, is Israel and Hamas, who is right, the gender dysphoria, a damaged culture, why they make you choose, and this topic today is America, the great experiment. On the topic of America, the great experiment, there's 4 points that I want to bring out. We're going to talk about freedom. Freedom. Everyone should know about freedom, but freedom with structure, what does that mean? Second point is going to be, does diversity strengthen us? Diversity, does it strengthen us? And what about America? Has it become, or is it becoming ungovernable? And the fourth point would be about God in this country. Is he in or is he out? So that's the 4 points we're going to go over. And let me begin by saying this. The United States of America is such of a world focus, whereas globally it's admired and it's also despised. I think we always have been. The observance of American life, including its government actions on foreign and domestic concerns, and also the lifestyles of its citizens, draws sentiments of dislike, not only in the worldview, but also amongst our citizened aliens, if that's a correct description of those that are now here, but they're from elsewhere. They form some, for some reason, they feel entitled to degrade America, although they are not originally from here, and they want to fix it to their own liking and perhaps from the land that they came from. Doesn't make much sense to me. In an earlier podcast, my suggestion, which offended a few people, was that if you're courageous, just stay where you're at and change your country. That's what we do in America. So, if you're going to come here and be like us, well, let us show you how to act like us. A bit sarcastic, but you'll have to forgive me. The hatred and the protests showcased by the civil commotion in America's streets, to me, shows to me at least their misinterpretation of America's style of freedom. And that is what I call freedom with structure. They need to learn that, what freedom with structure means and how to adhere to that. People hate the United States of America, but it is still the single most citizenship card sought after worldwide. So maybe we can question, why is that? The world points a finger and accuses the great America, but yet our borders are being just overrun with people that want to come here. It is the intrigue of a new kind of government setting a pathway that, by the words of George Washington in January of 1790, come across a letter, in an unusually forthright letter to Catherine Macaulay. Catherine was a celebrated London author of history in England, exactly from 1763 to 1783. Washington confessed. He said, the establishment of our new government seemed to be the last great experiment for promoting human happiness by creating a reasonable compact in civil society. Washington's best perception was not that of polished politics, I would say. He wasn't a polished politician, for what I know about him, okay, whatever. What the history books write and say. He wasn't the persuasion of polished politics in which he was not a public speaker to the likes of Thomas Jefferson. I think that's what I'm trying to say. He understood that freedom going unchecked would turn to anarchy. He understood that. Freedom is obtained from power, or I would say being more powerful than your oppressor that wishes for you not to have power. George Washington understood precisely the dynamics of power. Power is necessary, but power also corrupts mankind. So power is something that you need, but it's also something that can destroy you. Freedom is something that you want, but unchecked freedom will only be a freedom also that will destroy you. So put this in your notes. Freedom really is not what you truly want. Trust me on this. Freedom's not what you truly, truly want. So what do I want? What do you want? You want a caretaker is what you want. People want to be taken care of. That's really what they want. Now, the only entity, and I told you that these podcasts always, it's God included, okay? I'm not here to shove him down your throat or enforce any particular religious belief on you in these podcasts, but it's God included. The only entity that is capable of absolute freedom and the wherewithal to handle it is God. Only God. Everything, every country, every nation, every attempt that tries to establish total freedom falls down miserably. So the United States of America, this great experiment, is an attempt, the last great attempt, as Washington described it correctly as well. He described it correctly. The last attempt to show the world how we could write a constitution and enforce upon people that want to be free with freedom, but structured properly. Structured properly. I think that's saying it correctly. The great experiment of America, it was the true novelty of the world. It still is the great experiment, especially in this 21st century where it is definitely being challenged. The question is not about the democracy. Does it work? Yeah. The question is not, did it work? Because to this point, it has worked. The question is, can it continue to work in today's world? That's the big question. And that leads me to believe that one of two had to change to even put that latter question on the table. Think about it. In our America today, is the government changing, or is it the people that is changing? Something is changing, no doubt about that. So if America's experiment, if it's perfect in the scheme of all other imperfections of government, then it will survive. But survival will it's going to go on only as long as the tenets of its government, secular, and might I add, spiritually, as long as that remains intact. It's the only way it will survive, if what we intended remains intact. If it remains unamendable, I guess I should say. Freedom needs structure, that's my first point. But does freedom need God also in order? That's another point that I'm going to make here. Does freedom also need God in order to have true freedom? That's a later point. I'm going to discuss that. America was an experiment from the onset of its birth. It is sort of paralleled. It was paralleled compared to ancient cultures such as the exodus of the Hebrews to the land of Canaan, finding one of milk and honey. America was this great experiment of a promised land that consisted of a smelting pot of every enslaved or oppressed family or individual soul wanting a place just short of the promises of heaven that's expressed by God himself. America was a land of understood freedom. Freedom with structure so that you could truly be free. So let's talk about structure. Let me do that. Let's talk about structure. Freedom without structure is like a house of cards. They'll soon fall upon each other as the passing of the first windstorm. In spite of all the global hype about America, and it's falling apart politically, economically, militarily, culturally, despite of all that, the borders are being overrun with millions who still think that it is a dream place to be had. Immigration is one point, as well as I present this question. Immigration, does diversity, here's the point about immigration, does diversity make us strong? Let's talk about that. Next point. Does diversity strengthen us in light of what's happening at America's borders? I don't know if anyone told them that, is the American dream still the American dream? What about diversity? Should make us stronger, should it not? I mean, America was founded upon everyone coming to this land and being free. Everyone's creed could be practiced. But whoever said divided, not united, whoever said, what famous quote? Is there a quote that says, divided we stand? I don't think there's a quote that I know of that's famous or credible that says, divided we stand. How does an open invitation of every different political stance, every different religious creed, every different, cultural preferences, how does that help a country stand strong? And I'll wait for that answer, okay? Okay, let's just say, okay, the Jews can live here and hating Palestinians. Is that good? Is that healthy? The Palestinians can live here and they can hate the Jews. Is that healthy? The blacks want equality, and hey, let's just say that the whites supposedly want supremacy. Does that work? So how could you say that diversity makes us strong? How does that theory work out? Well, I think that unity within our division is the proper political war cry. Unity within our division. However, every faction of media frenzy weighs towards separating us. It separates blacks against whites. It tells the story. It's blacks against whites, Asian diversity. Now, Jewish versus Palestinian sentiment, women's rights, women against men, straight against crooked. If you could call something straight, I guess the opposite would be crooked. I mean, diversity across the board. So people who are coming to America, however, are still attracted to her because she is still great, right? Of course she's great. Look at the issues. Or perhaps they just, maybe they never got the news yet that America is great, but not so much anymore. Being a devil's advocate here. World media does not view America as great any longer. It's just better. It's better than what? Better than many places. Better than places like Venezuela, Mexico, Iran, and probably all Muslim countries whose government places religious convictions as the excuse of poverty and the oppression of women and every other subgroup of humankind. They are attracted here more so because their current world is bad or horrible, to say the least. So are they still coming to a better place or a place that's not as bad from whence they have come? So this great experiment of America, to define it more precisely, was to establish a nation or country that allows two necessary entities to protect each other from each other, and neither can exist without each other, if that's a little bit of a mouthful. And that would be government and citizenry, I'll call it. Citizens must have a strong and a powerful government to call upon in order to protect them against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Government, on the other hand, must have a strong and powerful citizenry to call upon to protect it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Each needs the other with the proper balance of power and trust. I'll talk about trust when I get to the point of is America, or could America become ungovernable? We are both strong but never hurt each other. This great experiment of America, established in 1776, wrote expressly in its Constitution that a government for the people and a government by the people. Diversity makes us stronger. That is far from the truth. Well, it's far from the truth. How can being different make you stronger? The format of America's government, the great experiment, as George Washington declared, it stops at equality, not supremacy. That's the key. Yes, diversity can be great as long as it stops at everybody having equality, not anyone having supremacy. I would venture to say that every group in America that is holding up a sign or waving a flag, if they would be honest with themselves, they don't want equality, they don't want justice. What they want is supremacy over the other groups, whether you like that statement or not, howbeit true. I don't see the divisionary ethnic groups in America displaying the correct signage. It's never what you want. And why justice, what I'm saying, let me back up. Justice is never what you want. And why would I say that? Justice. Because the only ones that should ever dare to ask for it from a higher power would be ones that have nothing to be ashamed of or concerned about justice for them and their race as well. True justice does not only involve one side of any argument or instance. The great experiment, the constitution of it, meant equality, not brutality to any or the other as justice. I would dare to say that every and all special interest groups, they don't want anything less than superiority. All over the other groups, their satisfaction will come with superiority and not equality. That's my take on that. So let's look. George Washington. He referred to America as the Great Experiment because the United States was seen as a new and unique form of government, and because it was based on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and self-governance. The founding of the United States represented an experiment in creating a nation where power was derived from the consent of the governed, rather than from a monarch or any other ruling authority. And this concept, it was revolutionary at the time, and Washington's characterization of the country was an experiment reflecting the uncertainty and excitement surrounding the establishment of a new form of government. So, my podcast, as you notice, says God included. So, in that note, let me go a little bit further. The greatest attraction of the new America was, on the premise of God included, the greatest attraction of the new America was the freedom to worship God. The freedom to worship God. It was expressed that it was the God of Christ, by the way. Just kind of make it clear on that. It was Christianity. It was not a freedom to establish any other religions outside of Christianity originally whatsoever. And totally contrary to the thoughts of many wishful thinking scholars, the separation of church and state, that was never implied. That confusion was derived by a few spokesmen on the matter of a letter in 1802 that was from Thomas Jefferson. And it was sent to the Danbury Baptists, and they had a phrase in it that was called a wall of separation between church and state. That's where that confusion came in. There never was an intention for the government to rule out religion in the government. Its intention was to make sure that the government said that no religious faction of religion could insist that it be the religion and that's it, where you could be forced, because they wanted freedom, but it was freedom to worship, freedom to worship. They wanted their freedom for a purpose. Just if I'll throw a little bit of Bible in this, okay, God included. When the Hebrews, when God said, "Let my people go," there was a statement from God himself, delivered by Moses, so that they could go into the desert for 3 days, just for 3 days, if nothing else, and worship God. Let my people go, let them become free so that they can be free to worship God. So, this next point, fear of an ungovernable America. Do you think that America right now might be on the verge of not being able to be governed? If a constituency becomes, for any reason, non-trusting of its government powers, of its governing powers, that consistency slowly but certainly will become ungovernable. Let me say this. One of the ticking time bombs ready for explosion is the attempt to remove anybody from a ballot. Not to key in on names, but the latest attempt in this country to remove Donald Trump from ballots, I think, is the biggest mistake that this country right now could possibly do. And I'll tell you why. I want you to imagine, and this subject right here now is on the fear of an ungovernable. What would make its people ungovernable? Imagine the American people that are at odds end on that move if that happens. Donald Trump loses the election, and half of the non-agreeable country convince themselves that that was the reason why. Now they say that you stole the election, credibly say, because in my opinion, you have an America that now has become ungovernable. An extreme distrust when you can remove anybody from a ballot at your will or at your reason. You find a reason why and you make it a lawful reason. So when I talk about the fear of an ungovernable America, I think that in my lowly opinion here, okay? In my humble opinion, all right, that's the right word to say. I think that is the biggest mistake the worst political move that anybody could possibly make, the worst one. Any country that does one of a few things will render the people ungovernable. One is to tell them who you can or cannot vote for one. You will make your people ungovernable once you do that. If you do not trust your people to bear arms for their own protection, even against you, the government, you will render your country ungovernable. A government that cannot trust its people to bear arms should not be able to trust its government to do the same, if you think about that. So, the last point, final point, in this country. God, is he in or is he out? A mission of religion. Let me talk to you about religion, the mission of religion, and what's the purpose of religion. It's to impart moral code and ethical compliance upon those that have become too large in numbers to personally know. That's what religion does. It imparts moral code and ethical compliance upon those that have become too large in numbers to personally know. If that falls apart, then you have no common compass to steer, and actions and behaviors that become written and enforced by those unqualified and even uneducated enough to impart correctness upon themselves. Henceforth, I've said this a few times, no man is qualified to write his own moral code. If it is attempted, it's done by the blind leading the blind, and there is a deep ditch on either side. Empires that have attempted this, such as Hannibal, which was the first, that wrote, I think it was the first, that wrote an elaborate code of justice, but it failed. And that was the Babylonian Empire, because it was an elaborate code, and that's where you first heard of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Very strict rules and regulations. You do this, you're going to get that done to you. You do that, and you're going to get this done to you. The code could not exact a will of the people to have an intrinsic set of dignity, though, because dignity, moral value, must be inherited from a moral supremacy, and that would be God. So if you write a perfect code, if it would be a perfect code of law and order, it doesn't seem to ever work on the broad scale of justice if you have to make the people obey the law. You cannot force people to be moral that don't want to be moral. But if somebody is moral, you do not have to force them to stay moral. Sort of like the Ten Commandments. Do not steal, do not covet your neighbor's goods, do not lie, do not bear false witness. And you can put your eyes on every single one of those rules, but it says that if you just do one thing, if you love the supreme being God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and if you love strangers, just stop right there. And if you do that, nothing could make you lie, cheat, and steal. So, my point here is, without religion, anyone that has more than anyone else becomes a target for the world of thugs. Without religion. Because without religion, to impart a moral code and ethical compliance, thievery is not wrong. So America, God in or out. Originally, God was all in. Mike Johnson, Louisiana representative, he quoted Chesterton in a speech just recently that I listened to, in that America was the only country founded upon a creed. The only country that was founded upon a creed. And I'm talking about our country, God in or God out. It's listed with almost theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence. We deviated from that 60 years ago when some government leaders influenced by, if you remember this, William Murray court case that eventually removed prayer from schools. Some mentioned the misinterpreted letter from Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists, and he addressed the need for government to stay out of church politics except for prohibiting them by law not to dictate any insistence of a one particular religion. It meant not to bully religion. Its intent was not to remove religion. Just so you know. Historically, it clearly documents the early colonists that they followed the dictates of Christianity, and it had to be adhered to even if you was going to hold public office, if you read any of the the laws and the Constitution of the original 13 colonies. Religion was by all means included and must not be excluded from government. Conservatives have really done a very poor job in defending this premise. Regarding the self-axiom, which says that if I can make you do something, then I should make you do it. And that's a new American culture, or perhaps on a global level. COVID was the great experiment on that note. If I can make you do something, then I should make you do it. Why not? And let's see how far we can go into bringing the world into a subject and subject it to a single authority, and that authority cannot include capitalism and certainly not religion. God in or God out. But religion, faith, was the catalyst that inspired men of conscience to remove slavery and bigotry, and it called for equality. It was religion and faith that was the catalyst for that. George Washington said to keep this alliance, religion and morality are an indispensable force. John Adams said that our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people that are wholly inadequate for each the other. So if you wonder what the Western world is doing, perhaps for 2,000 years, gazing at a cross and a crucifix, you wonder why we do it. Why do we gaze upon the iconic cross and the crucifix and Christ on that cross? What does it do and what is its purpose? Again, let me remind you on the subject of God. As far as our country is concerned, God in or God out. Psychologically, if you can get people to voluntarily confront the things that deeply disturb them and compels them into paralysis and avoidance and possible into tyranny, they will become brave and they'll become healthier if you can get them to voluntarily face their demon. If they can look at the terrible thing that happened and they see an outcome that was good, they will become brave and they'll become healthier. And that's why people gaze at the crucifix and they wear crosses. Our America, in a world of removing the nostalgia of its historical tyranny, it's only removing the ability to learn and to advance our minds to a higher level. Removing God for the sake of taking the sergeant of arms out of the room will only make the room a better place because the bad people are still in the room. And I would perhaps, do you realize how ridiculous it is to remove a street name but not remove the criminals that walk the street? Kind of ridiculous. And do you realize, if you agree that that's ridiculous, maybe you'll agree with this as ridiculous. Do you realize how ridiculous it is to remove God because of the guilt trip that his presence imposes upon you? And I always say that atheists, they don't have a problem with God. They have a problem with the God and the character of God that Christianity presents. However, a little FYI, God, whether he is present or absent, your intrinsic dignity will always be there to haunt you. So I would question you. Here's my question. God, as far as our country is concerned, God, in or out? And it can't be God for some, it must be God for all. God must be fundamental, and it was as it was at the onset of America. So, here's the ending thoughts. Here's the ending thoughts to this podcast. 4 points. Freedom with structure. The original Constitution, if it's not changed and it's adhered to, we got that. We're okay. Second point was, does diversity strengthen us? Well, only if in our diversity, together, we have a common goal that becomes more important than our own desires. It's sort of like 10 people in a boat. They're all different. One's white, one's black, one's a Protestant, one's a Catholic. There's women, there is men, there is everyone is diverse. They're from different countries, and they're fighting and they're feuding and they're fussing and they're getting ready to throw each other overboard. And then the winds come and the boat begins to sink, and now they're all bailing water out and working for a common cause. So diversity can strengthen us if our fundamental goal is for a common, all-around, general purpose. Then yes, in that definition, diversity does strengthen us. What about on the question of an ungovernable America? That's the one that worries me right now. The problem is if trust in the government is no longer instilled, if you lose trust in your government, government will have a much more difficult time governing the people. And finally, the one I just completed. God, is he in or is he out? Sad to say that I think that he is on the way out, at least by the secular popular society. But the good news is this. Nobody can kick God out. And the reason being is because he controls the government. So, all right. I hope you've listened to those points, pondered them in your heart, so that you can learn more. I don't try to persuade you to think how I think. I tell you what I think. When you can tell me what you think, then I would like to consider and try to understand how you come to your conclusions. And as we do that, we will learn from each other. So, freedom with structure, does diversity strengthen us? And ungovernable America, is God in or out, was our discussion today. This is Charles Miller, and this is the voice of reason, God included. I want to thank you for stopping in on our podcast. Please share it, please subscribe, and please say something good. I'll catch you on the next podcast. God bless you.